chaired the 50th G7 summit? The answer is option B, Giorgia Meloni. Where was the 2024 G7 summit held? The answer is option A, Fasano, Italy. Fasano, a picturesque town in the Apulia region of Italy, served as the venue for the 50th G7 summit. What is the aim of the G7? The answer is option B, economic cooperation. What action did G7 leaders take to support Ukraine's fight for freedom? The answer is option C, all of the above. G7 leaders collectively imposed sanctions on Russia, pledged $50 billion in new financing to support Ukraine, and signed a bilateral security agreement with Ukraine during the summit. When was Russia expelled from the G7? The answer is option A, 2014. Russia was expelled from the G7, previously known as the G8, in 2014 due to its annexation of Crimea, which was part of Ukraine. As a result, they suspended Russia's participation in the G8 and imposed economic sanctions on Russia. Which country's president reaffirmed unwavering support for Ukraine? The answer is option C, United States. What did the G7 leaders announce regarding Russia's sovereign assets? The answer is option B. They would remain immobilized until Russia ends its aggression. When was the G7 first started? The answer is option B, 1973. What was the main focus of the G7 summit in 2024? The answer is option C, all of the above. The summit addressed critical issues such as the climate crisis, economic practices, and support for developing countries. Which country's prime minister announced that Fasano would be the headquarters of the G7? The answer is option B, Italy. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni announced that Fasano would be the permanent headquarters of the G7. Who represented the European Union at the summit? The answer is option A, President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, represented the EU at the G7 summit. Where was the 49th G7 summit held in 2023? The answer is option C, Hiroshima, Japan. The 49th G7 summit took place in Hiroshima Prefecture, where leaders discussed challenges to peace, including the Russian invasion of Ukraine, climate change, and geopolitical crises. What were the main topics discussed during the 49th G7 summit? The answer is option A, Russian invasion of Ukraine, climate change, and the COVID-19 pandemic. Where will the G7 summit be held in 2025? The answer is option B, Kananaskis, Canada. Why is Kananaskis significant for the G7 summit? The answer is option A. It hosted the G8 summit in 2002. How many core member countries participate in the G7 summit? The answer is option C, 7. The G7 includes Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the United Kingdom, and the United States. Who represents the European Union at the G7 summit? The answer is option C, both A and B. The President of the European Commission and the President of the European Council are permanently welcome participants at all G7 meetings since 1981. How many invitees were present at the 50th G7 summit in 2024? The answer is option A, 11. Which pope became the first to attend a G7 summit of world leaders and address the perils and promises of artificial intelligence, AI? The answer is option C, Pope Francis. Which leader signed the US-Ukraine Bilateral Security Agreement? The answer is option A, Joe Biden.